Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're going to be looking at a medical case study, and
Ooh.
it's about heat stroke. We have this fascinating report all about a real patient, someone who actually experienced this firsthand. And
Uh-huh.
what makes this case even more interesting is how this heat stroke led to multi-organ failure.
Yeah, this is definitely a powerful reminder of how serious heat stroke can actually be.
Okay, so before we get into the specifics of the case itself, can we just back up a bit? I think
Hmm.
it'd be really helpful if we could understand exactly what heat stroke is. I mean, beyond just like, oh, it's really bad to get overheated.
Absolutely. So uh, you can think of heat stroke as the most extreme form of heat illness.
Okay.
And it happens when your body's natural cooling mechanisms,
Right.
like sweating, they just can't keep up with the heat.
So like the internal AC unit just gives out.
Exactly. And then it becomes a true medical emergency because your core body temperature starts to climb really rapidly. We're
Mm.
talking 104.9 degrees Fahrenheit or even
Right.
higher. And this kind of intense heat can really quickly cause damage, especially to the brain.
Now, I remember reading something about different types of heat stroke. Could you maybe clarify that a bit?
Yeah, you're right. There are two main types. So first, we've got classic heat stroke. And this one typically affects people who are more vulnerable to heat.
Okay.
So think like very young children or older adults, individuals with chronic illnesses.
Right.
Their bodies might already have a harder time with regulating temperature.
So those folks might be at higher risk even on like just a moderately warm day.
Precisely. And then on the other hand, we have what's called exertional heat stroke. This one is more common in athletes or anyone who's doing intense physical activity out in the heat,
Got it.
even young and healthy individuals. Because their bodies are generating so much heat from all the exertion, they overwhelm their cooling systems.
So exertional heat stroke isn't so much about the outside temperature being extreme, but more about the internal heat that the body is producing.
Exactly.
Mhm.
And the case report we have today is actually about a 40-year-old man, seemingly healthy, no prior medical history.
Okay.
And this is where things get really interesting because his situation shows how rapidly heat stroke can escalate,
Oh, wow.
even in someone you wouldn't think is high risk.
So this wasn't a case of someone being out in the sun for hours on end?
No, not at all. He was found unresponsive in the street.
Mhm.
And when the paramedics arrived, his body temperature was a staggering 42 degrees Celsius.
Wow, that's 107.6 Fahrenheit. That's incredibly serious.
Absolutely. But fortunately, the emergency response was really quick, so the paramedics immediately intubated him,
Okay.
meaning they inserted a tube to help him breathe, and they
it.
started aggressive cooling measures.
Why was intubation so crucial in this particular situation?
Well, because with heat stroke, especially such a high temperature, there's a significant risk that the person's brain is swelling,
Oh, wow.
and this could lead to seizures, coma, even death. So intubation helps protect the airway and make sure that they're getting enough oxygen.
So it's about more than just getting air into the lungs. It's also about protecting the brain from further damage.
Exactly. And in this man's case, the paramedics' quick actions were truly life-saving. Within an hour, his temperature had dropped significantly, down to a much safer 36 degrees Celsius.
That's amazing. It sounds like that rapid response made all the difference.
It really did. But
Yeah.
even with that quick intervention, this case took a turn that shows just how widespread the effects of heat stroke can be.
Uh-oh.
He developed multi-organ failure.
Wow.
So his body was basically in a state of shutdown.
So it wasn't just the high temperature they had to address, it was the domino effect that heat had on his entire system.
Precisely. And the medical report goes into detail about the extent of this damage.
Mm.
So his brain, liver, kidneys, muscles,
Oh my God.
even his blood clotting abilities were all affected.
Wow. So it really is this cascading effect where one organ after another starts to struggle. Can we maybe delve a little deeper into what those organ failures look like? I imagine the medical report paints a pretty clear picture of the severity.
It does. For instance, one of the things they found was a condition called rhabdomyolysis.
Okay, rhabdomyolysis. That sounds pretty intense. What exactly is that?
So it essentially means his muscle tissue is breaking down.
Okay.
And this happens because the extreme heat damages the cells. And then those damaged cells release substances into the bloodstream,
Oh.
which can be harmful to the kidneys.
Right.
And speaking of the kidneys, he also developed acute kidney injury, meaning his kidneys were struggling to filter waste products from his blood.
That's a lot for his body to handle all at once. Did the report mention anything else they observed?
Yes, his blood tests showed a low platelet count.
Okay.
Platelets are the cells responsible for clotting.
Right.
And this is a serious concern because it means even a minor injury could lead to uncontrolled bleeding.
Wow.
And on top of that, he also had abnormal clotting factors.
Right.
So it further complicated things.
So it's not just that his organs were failing individually, but his entire body was struggling to maintain those really basic functions that keep us alive,
Right.
like filtering waste and preventing excessive bleeding.
That's a great way to put it. And all of this is reflected in those blood test results you mentioned. For example, they found alarmingly high levels of certain enzymes, like creatine kinase.
Okay.
That's a telltale sign of muscle damage and further supports that rhabdomyolysis diagnosis.
It sounds like every test they ran just confirmed the severity of his condition. So we've talked about the what, but I'm really curious about the why. What is it about heat stroke that causes this domino effect of organ failure?
Well, it's a complex process, but one way to think about it is like a chain reaction.
Okay.
The extreme heat triggers this massive inflammatory response throughout the body.
So it's almost like the body's defense mechanisms are going into overdrive.
Right.
But that overdrive ends up doing more harm than good.
Exactly. And this inflammatory response is partly driven by the release of these signaling molecules called cytokines.
Cytokines.
Yeah. You can imagine them as like messengers that alert the immune system to danger.
Got it.
But in the case of heat stroke, it's like these messengers are sending out a distress signal that's way too loud.
Oh, wow.
And that causes the immune system to overreact.
And that overreaction is what leads to the organ damage.
Precisely. The excessive inflammation, it directly damages tissues and it disrupts blood flow to vital organs.
Right.
And this can actually lead to a condition called systemic inflammatory response syndrome, or SIRS for short.
Okay. SIRS. Is that similar to sepsis? I've heard that can be really dangerous.
Yeah, they share some similarities in how the body responds, but they have different triggers.
Okay.
So sepsis is usually caused by an infection,
Right.
whereas SIRS could be triggered by various things, including heat stroke, trauma, or even certain medications.
Got it.
The key point is that both involve this overwhelming inflammatory response that can spiral out of control.
And in the case of severe heat stroke, SIRS can actually progress to something even more serious, right?
Yeah.
You mentioned multi-organ dysfunction syndrome, or MODS.
Right. MODS is essentially the next stage where multiple organ systems start shutting down. It's often a life-threatening situation.
Wow.
And unfortunately, that's what happened in this case.
So this man is in the ICU, multiple organs are failing. What happens next? What kind of treatment options are even available at that point?
Well, when someone is as critically ill as this man was, the treatment focuses on what we call supportive care.
Okay.
It means doing everything possible to try and keep the body functioning while it's trying to heal.
Right.
So he needed ventilator support to help him breathe,
Okay.
medications to stabilize his blood pressure and heart rate,
Wow.
and dialysis to do the work of his kidneys.
That sounds like an incredibly delicate balancing act.
It absolutely is. The medical team has to constantly monitor and adjust treatments based on any changes in his condition.
Mm-hmm.
And while they're doing all of that, they're also trying to address the specific organ damage.
Okay.
So, for example, he would have received medications to help protect his liver fluids and electrolytes, to support his kidneys,
Got it.
and transfusions to address those blood clotting issues.
So it's a truly multifaceted approach with specialists from all these different fields working together.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's actually one of the things that makes this case so compelling.
Yeah.
It really highlights the incredible skill and collaboration required in critical care medicine.
Absolutely.
But it also really underscores the importance of those early interventions we talked about before.
Right.
You know, the paramedics' quick actions in cooling him down and intubating him likely bought him some really precious time.
Time that his body desperately needed to start recovering.
Precisely. And in fact, the medical report actually cites some pretty grim statistics.
Okay.
Multi-organ failure due to heat stroke, it often has a very high mortality rate.
Oh, wow.
But this man's story took an unexpected turn.
He survived.
He did. After 18 grueling days in the ICU, he stabilized enough to be transferred to a general ward.
Wow.
And from there, he continued to improve, eventually moving to a rehabilitation facility to regain his strength and mobility.
That's incredible. So despite the severity of his condition, he ultimately made a full recovery.
Almost. So the report notes that he did regain all of his cognitive function and was able to return to his daily life. However, he did experience some lingering muscle weakness as a result of the rhabdomyolysis.
Yeah, that's understandable given the extent of the damage his muscles went through. But it's still remarkable that he was able to come back from all of that. His case really is a testament to the resilience of the human body.
It absolutely is. And it also underscores the importance of early recognition and treatment of heat stroke.
Yeah.
Every minute counts.
Speaking of early recognition, let's shift gears for a moment and talk about the signs and symptoms. What should people be looking out for, both in themselves and others, to prevent a situation like this from happening?
Well, the hallmark sign of heat stroke is a very high body temperature, usually 104 degrees Fahrenheit or above.
Okay.
But there are often other indicators as well.
Like what kind of red flags should we be aware of?
Keep an eye out for any changes in mental status.
Okay.
So confusion, slurred speech, agitation, even seizures can occur as the brain starts to overheat.
So if someone's acting strangely in the heat, that's a major cause for concern.
Absolutely. And don't ignore physical symptoms like a rapid heartbeat, rapid breathing, nausea, vomiting, or like a throbbing headache.
Right.
These can all be signs that the body is struggling to cope with the heat.
It's almost like a checklist. High temperature plus any of these other symptoms, and it's time to take immediate action.
Exactly. And that action should always be to call for emergency medical help. Heat stroke is a true medical emergency, and delaying treatment can have some really devastating consequences.
While waiting for help to arrive, is there anything bystanders can do to help someone who might be experiencing heat stroke?
Yes, absolutely. The most important thing is to start cooling the person down immediately. So move them to a shady or air-conditioned area, remove any excess clothing, and if possible, fan them and apply cool compresses or ice packs to their neck, armpits, and groin.
So those first few minutes can be critical even before medical professionals arrive.
They absolutely can.
Yeah.
It's all about buying time and giving the body a chance to start cooling down.
It makes you think, with climate change and the increasing frequency of heat waves, knowing this information could be crucial for everyone.
I agree. This case study really drives home the point that heat stroke is not something to be taken lightly. It's a serious medical condition that can affect anyone, regardless of age or health status.
This has been so interesting, and it feels like we've only just scratched the surface here.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, we've talked about this physical impact of heat stroke, but I'm wondering about like the psychological side of things.
Right.
What kind of lasting effects might someone experience after going through something as traumatic as multi-organ failure?
That's a great question.
Mm-hmm.
And it's an area that definitely needs more attention, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Imagine going through what this man experienced.
Oh, gosh.
Weeks in the ICU, fighting for your life, not knowing if you'll fully recover. It's bound to have some kind of impact on your mental and emotional well-being.
It's like a whole other layer of recovery that we don't always consider.
Exactly. Some survivors might experience anxiety, depression, or even PTSD related to their heat stroke experience.
Wow.
They might have flashbacks, nightmares, a persistent fear of the heat. And even if someone makes a full physical recovery, those emotional scars can definitely linger.
That makes you wonder if there should be more resources and support systems in place specifically for heat stroke survivors.
Absolutely. And there's another layer to this as well. Like, what about the potential long-term health consequences?
Right.
Even with a seemingly full recovery, could there be subtle, lingering damage that we don't even fully understand yet?
That's a fascinating and kind of unsettling thought.
It is. Think about it. This man experienced significant damage to multiple organs, including his brain.
Right.
And while he did regain his cognitive function, could there be subtle changes at the cellular level that might show up later in life?
Yeah.
Could he be at higher risk for certain neurological conditions down the road?
These are questions that I imagine researchers are actively trying to figure out.
They are. And this case study really highlights the need for more research in this area. We need to better understand not just the immediate effects of heat stroke, but also those potential long-term consequences,
Yeah.
both physically and psychologically.
It makes you realize that heat stroke isn't something that just ends when the body temperature goes back to normal. It's like there can be this ripple effect that extends far beyond that initial crisis.
Precisely. And I think that's a key takeaway for our listeners.
Mm-hmm.
Heat stroke is not something to be taken lightly.
Right.
It's a serious medical condition with potentially really far-reaching implications.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what are some practical steps that our listeners can take to protect themselves and those around them?
Well, first and foremost, it's about awareness. Knowing the signs and symptoms we talked about earlier is so crucial. If you or someone you're with starts exhibiting those red flags, don't hesitate to seek medical attention.
And it's not just about knowing the signs, it's about being prepared, especially during hot weather.
Absolutely. Staying hydrated is key. Drink plenty of water or electrolyte-rich beverages throughout the day, especially if you're active outdoors.
Right.
Wear loose-fitting, light-colored clothing,
Okay.
and try to avoid strenuous activity during the hottest parts of the day.
And if you do have to be out in the heat, take frequent breaks in the shade or in air conditioning.
Exactly. And don't forget to check on vulnerable individuals like young children, older adults, and those with chronic illnesses. They might need extra help staying cool and hydrated.
It's about looking out for each other,
Yeah.
being mindful of the risks, and taking those simple but effective steps to stay safe.
Well said. This case study, while alarming, ultimately serves as a powerful reminder of the importance of prevention and preparedness.
This deep dive has been incredibly informative, if a bit sobering.
Yeah.
We've delved into the complexities of heat stroke, explored its devastating effects, and witnessed the remarkable resilience of the human body.
For sure.
But most importantly, we've gained valuable insights into how we can all play a role in preventing these tragedies from happening.
I completely agree. Awareness is power. And by understanding the risks and taking appropriate precautions, we can help protect ourselves and those we care about.
So to our listeners, we urge you to take this information to heart. Stay informed, stay hydrated, and stay safe. And as always, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep those deep dives going. Until next time.